Welcome to the Catalyst Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Today's guest is Amanda Arrowsmith, Associate Director of Residential Programs with Chestnut. This is actually Amanda's second tour with Chestnut, which we'll discuss in a moment. Amanda is an experienced leader with a demonstrated history of working in the hospital and healthcare industry. She is skilled in operations management, team building, organizational leadership, and addiction recovery. I should add that Amanda is a rare triple threat. She has a master's in social work, management, and business administration. That's pretty impressive. Today, Amanda joins me to discuss the timely topic of sports gambling addiction, a topic very much in the news, particularly as we record this in the midst of the NCAA men's basketball tournament, a time when offices around the country are obsessed with betting pools, arguably a far more benign manifestation of the broad, rapid, and alarming rise of sports gambling that's going on in our country right now. And the concomitant, I didn't think I'd be able to pronounce that word properly, but I think I did. I think I landed it, Amanda. I think I landed it on the first try. That's amazing. I'm not going to try it again.
All right.
Actually, I might have to now. And the concomitant rise in sports gambling addiction. Amanda, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
This is a great topic, and everybody tells me you are the person I need to speak with about this. So, but I need to first ask you, okay, Masters in Social Work, Management, and Business Administration. So what compelled you to spend so much time in various classrooms, Amanda?
You know, some could say that maybe I'm a little sick and disturbed for wanting to, continue the education, but I'm a lifelong learner. It didn't always start that way, of course. When you first get into school, it's kind of feels more like something that you have to do because people are telling you to do it. But the farther that I went, I really just realized that I loved learning. And all of those things, really just helped me to better serve the organization that I work for and my community and serving those that need help.
It's interesting. I like learning too. I consider myself a lifetime learner. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the alternative is, but I do it. I guess I'm more of an autodidact. I choose what my interests, or I guess my interests choose me. I'm not sure which, and I pursue them independently as opposed to going to classes are more structured. So obviously you like that structure. And I suppose you also like learning toward a utilitarian goal, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely, as you were talking, I was saying to myself, that I definitely enjoy the structure of that. And, just really the pushing myself. And I think it also helps to have other people like professors push you as well. And I enjoy that feedback of, especially in a master's program, having it, be so different than a bachelor's program. There's more conversations that are happening. There's more shared learning rather than, textbook kind of educational learning.
So this is your second stint with Chestnut, yes? How does that happen?
It is. So I have been in the addiction field for roughly 25 years. I, started out at Chestnut Health Systems. Worked on the adolescent boys unit. So I was here the very beginning of my career for 6 years working with adolescent boys. And quite honestly,
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry to interrupt. Is that just simply because that was the nature of the work? Did you gravitate to that for a particular reason?
Honestly, it was in the beginning, I just needed to find a job. And so I applied for back then what they called a residential counselor. So I worked on the residential boys unit. And then I grew to love it. I do think that it, came full circle. I did grow up in a alcoholic household. So having that experience and, I truly, looking back, I truly believe that it was for full circle for me. Like this was definitely where I was meant to be. And then, like I said, I mean, I grew to love it. I had many mentors the first time, that I was here and helped create a foundation of really just being able to serve others in the addiction field.
So, what was the gap in time between leaving Chestnut and returning Chestnut? Curious.
So, I actually left the area and moved into a different area into Peoria. And so I had an opportunity to go and work at the Illinois Institute for Addiction Recovery at Proctor Hospital. That at the time, that's what it was called. They've gone through a couple mergers and as a clinician, and then stayed with that company for about 15 years. Went through many different mergers, worked my way up to being a director with Carl Health, and then moving back into this area. And didn't want to drive, all of the way. I had always kind of paid attention to Chestnut in what they were doing and how they were moving along in the industry, primarily being able to treat the entire person within a community setting. There's definitely something to be said about non-for-profit organizations, that are their missions, not that it, makes it any better, or it's just different than working for a larger hospital corporation. And so, I've always paid attention to what Chestnut was doing, the research that they were pulling in. And so when I saw that this position was open, I grabbed it and I was just like, I kind of need to go back home. And
Back home.
yeah,
Yes, safe, nice, comfortable landing.
yeah.
Thank you for that, Amanda. So, yeah, I want to get into the topic du jour, which, of course, is sports gambling, actually, sports gambling addiction. So, if you would give our listeners some context to appreciate the scopes of sports gambling addiction in the U.S., what's driving it? How widespread is it?
Absolutely. So, sports betting in the US has exploded in just a few years, if we really think about it. So in 2018, the Supreme Court allowed states to legalize sports gambling. We've seen the fastest expansion of betting in American history. Today, sports wagering is legal in nearly 40 states. The industry itself has really surged from about 400 million in revenue in 2018 to more than 13 billion in 2024. And really it's because it's everywhere. The ability to have that at your fingertips, the mobile betting that's there, the sport books are in our pockets. Instead of us going somewhere to, partake in a social activity of gambling, it literally is with us 24/7. There's aggressive advertising, which really has created a people thinking that it's normal. I mean, we see it in every social media, we see it in every commercial, and really the being able to have micro betting, it ramps up the risk that people would engage in. It creates, that higher dopamine very quickly. And again, very easy to tap into 24/7.
Now, I want to come back to that in a moment. So, because there is no smell of alcohol or physical impairment, sports gambling addiction is often called a hidden epidemic. What are the subtle behavioral shifts beyond just losing money that might signal to a family member that their loved one is losing control?
So the first thing really that happens, and it's really the earliest red flag, is what I would call like a mental takeover. So there's really becomes an obsession, and then mental preoccupation that's going along with that. That behavior that comes with that mental preoccupation is that maybe that they are consistently checking scores or their odds, they're checking their betting apps, maybe even in mid conversation, without even realizing that they're doing it. They're reaching for their phone, they're pulling up that app, they're checking the scores for whatever game might be going on at that moment. And then there's also things that, maybe shifts in their daily routine. They're avoiding meals, they're skipping things that maybe once were important to them, possibly disappearing during for a stretch of time during the game. losing interest in hobbies that, like I said, once they had enjoyed doing. There could possibly be more secrecy, lying about how much they are betting, how often they are betting. And then, really, I think one item that probably family members and, friends, significant others could really see is that mood instability. So there could be increased anxiety, restlessness, irritability. Those emotions could change very rapidly with basically how they're doing in their bet. How are the game, how's the game going? And it's not just being a little bit upset, but it is very obvious with that irritability if they are losing in their bet.
Sure. Yeah, no, that all makes perfect sense. So you laid out what to look for. Of course, the next logical question is, once you see these signs, what do you do? But before I even get to that, there is that natural tendency, if it's a loved one, somebody close to you, to say, okay, what are you in for? If I were to give you X amount of dollars, would that settle the situation? Would that ease your anxiety? But we know that that's exactly what you should not be doing. Why is that seems an intuitive thing to do? Why is that not an advisable thing to do?
It really isn't because even though we want to rescue someone and it comes from a good place, right? Like it really comes from that place of wanting to assist and wanting to help them. What it actually does is continue to enable their behavior. Debt is really a symptom of the gambling disorder in itself. It's not the problem. So we really have to focus on fixing the problem, which is that compulsive behavior and the patterns of thinking. And so the what happens is that when, someone is trying to be helpful and to bail them out, what we call that, it actually doesn't allow the person to face those natural consequences. A lot of times people who suffer with compulsive gambling will come in and say that, they want to file for bankruptcy. And we actually, would discourage that because even filing for bankruptcy could be enabling and could be a bailout. They don't really understand those natural consequences. And so, instead, it's addressing it in a different way. It's
Right.
addressing it from
Sure.
the part of again the actual behavior and not trying to fix the debt itself.
Right. With the proviso, of course, that there may be situations where it's a very dire situation. You're under some sort of threat where, of course, you want to retire that debt ASAP. That's a little bit of a different, but, so
Yep.
not to minimize that
Yeah.
because that could very well be part of that scenario. So, what does a truly supportive intervention look like?
So it is. I mean, it is seeking out the help of professionals. It is going through cognitive behavioral therapy. And as you have mentioned, people are coming in with that extreme debt. So part of that has to be some financial counseling as well, and how that person is going to build that into their treatment plan. When a person comes in, obviously, I mean, as we have been talking about, it affects not just the person, but it affects the entire family unit. So being able to have family therapy and conferences to also help the family understand, why they can't bail them out or what can they do around setting boundaries, even with money. And it doesn't have to be forever for that person, but until they can really stop that cycle of the reward system, really, that is happening within the brain.
Could you cite any specific initiatives, any kind of outreach that you or Chestnut or Chestnut has been doing in this regard, vis-a-vis, of course, gambling addiction, sports gambling addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone that comes in for any type of services with Chestnut Health Systems, when they are reporting addiction, even if they say, they don't say anything about their gambling, because as we talked about before, it is quiet. People may not even realize that it is a problem. At Chestnut, we screen everyone that comes in for a gambling disorder. We're asking them questions about if they're engaging in that behavior, and if they are, then what does that look like? To see that if it's a problem again, so that we can create a plan for them that treats the entire person, and that because they may not even realize that their sports betting has become a problem, because as we discussed, because it's so prevalent in everything that we do, and we see it across the mainstream media all the time. So they may not even realize it's a problem. So that's one of the biggest initiatives that Chestnut has, and that we continue to do, and then even just providing the education that people need, that it is a problem, and that there is a way to I'm not going to say like fix the problem, but there is a way to take a look at what's going on, and then addressing the real issue. Because again, the debt is not the problem. It is,
Yeah.
what's going on within our bodies when they are making those sports bets.
Yeah, it's clear it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. I mean, all you have to do is, as you say, turn on the TV, you watch a sports event, the likes of FanDuel, et cetera, have become so embedded in that experience. And the major sports leagues are looking at that because that's becoming a real problem, and in fact, a danger to some of the players, where people are making these in-game parlays and holding players accountable if they are not doing what they're hoping or expecting them to do, and they're being accosted on the street, et cetera. So, and also you see it in these prediction markets, the emerging prediction markets. So it's, we're caught in this sort of pincer movement of all these things. So I think on the one hand, obviously we need to screen and have our eyes open, but clearly at some point this is going to, I think, I wonder what you think. Not really that important what I think, but I think this is going to have to be partly the sports leagues legislating what it is, that can be done or not done, and obviously broader legislation, I think, to rein some of this stuff in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it has to be driven by legislation and policy, and really thinking, I I say this, and then I realize, like, maybe this ages me, but like playing the tape all the way through, that what if we legalize things like the sports betting, like what's gonna happen 5 years down the road, or 10 years down the road, really, in your to communities, to people, to families. As you said, it's not just the person who is engaging in that behavior, but, it does create safety for players. It does create, issues really along all the way around.
What's kind of interesting is that we've long talked about the need to reduce stigma as it relates to substance use disorder, because with that stigma, obviously people are don't have the incentive to pursue the available remedies. I wonder if, in a weird way, gambling addiction is sort of the reverse, where there might need to be a little bit more stigma so people understand that this is not a socially acceptable thing at a certain level.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, because right now, I mean, as you said, it's built around everything that, we do socially. You think about like going out to eat, Buffalo Wild Wings came into mind. You go out to eat. I mean, they have TVs, every possible game that could potentially be on is everywhere in that establishment. It is something that has become more socially acceptable. And you also think about how, you that's how you even socialize. So even at work, people having, they're
The
making bets
pools.
at, yeah, making bets at work, and seeing even that. I mean, it it is centered around like even just being social with other people. You have Super Bowl parties, right? And so you gather your closest friends. And it is, I mean, and it's something that is completely have been it's mainstream. But with that, I mean, there's dire consequences, because people who have compulsive gambling disorder, they're at higher risk of suicide. I mean, because they feel like there's no way out. And it's so impactful that it really accelerates the brain's reward loop. I mean,
Mm.
people bet, they lose, they chase, and they repeat. Sometimes you get a bet, a win, and then the bet, and then lose, chase, and repeat. And it's very powerful. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it just so happens that I know down here in South Florida two bookies, and they're good friends of mine. And I get some firsthand accounts of some of the people they have to say, look, no more. There are people who even they don't want to they don't want to take their bet. They realize that, it's just this addictive loop. They're chasing and chasing and chasing, and it's just not good. And, yeah, I was going to ask you about betting pools and the like at work. Should that be frowned on? Should that be encouraged? Is it sort of benign? Is it just good fun? I think ultimately, we're adults and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and penalize everybody for a few people who have that particular problem, who can't turn that off.
Right. And I think that, I mean, do I think that it should completely be shut down? Absolutely not. I mean, it's the same thing with alcohol. I mean, alcohol is legal, and just because people drink doesn't mean that, they have a disease of alcoholism. So, but what I think is actually more important is to create the awareness and then create the signs and symptoms, making sure that we continue to talk about the signs and symptoms. And then as an organization or an employer, if there are those signs and symptoms, then being able to have very open conversations and not coming from a place of, reprimand or whatever the case may be, but come from a place of like, hey, I've noticed that this has been a problem, and just being open and honest with each other, I think really is the first thing to do if there is, signs of an issue.
Is gambling addiction, what's the word, heritable? Is it something that you are predisposed to?
So I think that if you take a look, the best way to think about that is if you take a look at really what is happening within the body. So the body, with those really like neurons and chasing that win, it's not really about the act. And so even with gambling, even though you're not ingesting something like you would do with substances or alcohol, that the predisposition is still there. It's not, your genes aren't saying like, okay, you're going to have a gambling, it's going to be gambling, but the the what is going on chemically is still there.
I see. So if I understand correctly, you're predisposed to some type of addictive behavior, but how it manifests itself
Yeah.
is subject to a whole range of
Yeah.
conditions.
Yeah. Yeah, because really, when we talk about addiction, again, I mean, it can be set in a behavior as well. So
Anyway, this is a fascinating and timely conversation, and I really appreciate you spending the time with me, Amanda, because I reached out to you just the other day because clearly there was a confluence of things around this particular issue. We're heading toward the Final Four and all this, and there's a lot of chatter in the major sports leagues about this rising problem. So I really do appreciate you coming on and talking about this.
yeah, well, thank you so much. Again, it's been fun. It's been an honor. And I anytime.
Great. Today I spoke with Amanda Arrowsmith, Associate Director of Residential Programs with Chestnut. This is Charles Epstein for the Catalyst Podcast. Thanks for listening.